Hello everyone, welcome to our Paint Night Online with Waterloo Public Library. I'm Christine, I'll be leading our paint along today. Before we begin, I just want to take a few minutes to go over my equipment that I have here so you can know what you have too. So I have my brushes here. They're all fairly small. Some of them are the flat brushes with the flat top. Others are sort of more detailed. And then, of course, I've got round brushes that are a little bigger than the detailed brushes, let's say. I also have a cup of water here, a palette that I've made out of an old cutting board, my canvas for tonight, some paper towel for dabbing the brushes, and I have my paints. So I have a white, titanium white, a cadmium yellow, medium hue, cobalt blue, viridian green, and raw umber. And I'll also go over my usual cleaning tips. When you're painting with your brushes and you're done with whatever you're doing and you need to clean it off, I just dip it in the water a little bit and dab it on the paper towel. And then it's ready to use for next time. And after the end of the session, I'll give it a much more thorough clean. So leaving your brushes like this in the water for long periods of time will tend to ruin them. So try not to do that. The other thing I usually mention is cleaning your palette at the end. I usually use a spray bottle. I spray my palette. I wipe it off with paper towel. I do that a couple times until not much is coming off, and then I wash it. It puts the heavy metals like the cadmium and the titanium and the cobalt, they go into the landfill and not into our water system. All right. So without further ado, let me introduce tonight's painting. Here we've got a lovely scene with some morning glories. A flower you'll probably see mostly this time of the year. A little bit different from our previous painting. This one is done with a glazing technique. So I did this one with the wet on wet technique, this one with the glazing technique. You'll notice the details here are much crisper. Try to get that light to, there we go. It doesn't like this one for some reason. The details are much crisper. Come on. The colors aren't mixed as they are on here. But there are sort of subtle gradations in color because the glazes are thinner. So you get sort of more of the white of the canvas showing through than you do here. So there's two ways to do glazing with acrylic. You can either mix it with water, or you can mix it with sort of a medium like this acrylic flow release. So this would, if I added it to my paints, make it flow much better. It wouldn't be nearly as chunky, and then I could, once it got to the right consistency and the right tone, I could put that on. However, that's something if you do a lot of glazing. If you don't do a lot of glazing, then for today, I'm just going to use water. Water and white. So I'm going to start by putting my burnt umber onto my palette. I'll add it over here. I'm going to add some white. See if that doesn't tone down the light just a little bit. And I'm going to mix the two together into sort of a medium tone. If I was using like a liquid medium, I might be able to just mix this with the brown and make it thin enough to use just on its own. But because I'm using water, if you add too much water to your paint, it becomes too thin and it seeps into all the cracks and bumps of the canvas, and you end up with a painting that looks like it's painted on sand. You get all these little pits in it where the dark paint has pooled and the water has pulled away and cleared. So to get sort of a smoother look, I'm not going to just water the brown down until it's the right sort of tone. Now glazing is done most often. This isn't, gospel, but most often glazing starts off with a painting with white and a dark tone like brown. So that's why I've mixed up this mid-tone brown. That will be the start of our underpainting or our sketch. So I'm going to start by just deciding where I want these two slats to begin. Doing my best just to line it up top and bottom, and top and bottom. I don't need to connect them yet. My paint is fairly liquid. I just keep adding a little bit of water to make it thinner and thinner. So when it doesn't hold its own shape very well, then you're about at the right consistency. So with my detail brush, I'm going to draw a pentagon for the first morning glory. So begin here. Oh, and you know what? I'm going to put the comments so I can see them. If you guys want to comment or ask any questions along the way, let me know. I'll glance up occasionally and keep an eye on them. Okay, so the pentagon, sort of like that, that. You don't have to worry too much about making it perfect. The one thing about glazing is it's very forgiving. You have to wait till everything dries, but then it's very easy to go over and correct your mistakes. So that's one. I'm going to draw a small sort of sideways pentagon for the flower over here. Pentagon, pentagon. There we go, 5 sides. And then again, another medium-sized one here. It's a little bit flatter. And that's sort of the starting point for my 3 flowers. Now to start on the leaves. The leaves are these spade heart shaped pieces of foliage. So starting over here. This one's sort of flat out this way, so this one's kind of off to the side. Oh, I'll put one over here. One sort of just underneath it. And one underneath that one too. One over here. One over here. I don't know, I seem to add more leaves in this thing every time I look at it. That's okay. And now the little buds. There's a little bud up here. I'll stick one in over here. I think I will do a leaf coming off the end here. The bottom there. And a little bud there. And a little bud down there. There we go. Now, like I said, we're going to do the painting in pretty much brown and white before we start adding the color. So I need a shade that's just about the right color for the shadows underneath the flowers there. So I'm going to add a little bit of white and start working on those shadows. And again, just dipping my brush and adding a tiny bit of water till I've got a very smooth flowing liquid there. So the shadows are all just sort of directly below the shape. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to draw everything again just a little bit further down. So about an inch here, this would be the shadow for the bud. The edge of the flower starts here and then goes down. And then about the leaf shadow is over here. There, that's a little bit better. No, I've forgotten to add that part of the flower. I'll fit that in later. About an inch below. It's gonna start, and then an inch below there. So now that I've got an idea for where the shadows are going to be, I'm going to start filling them in. Actually, probably a better idea to do this with a somewhat larger brush. So clean off this brush. I've got my flat brush out and I can start chunking in where we're going, wherever I want the shade to be. So glazing is a very slow methodical process. You can, it's almost meditative at times. There's no rush. If anything dries, that's fine. We'll just go over it again later. I think I'm going to need more of this shade color, so I'm going to add a bit more white. There we go. Just straight down there. Oop, I missed this one. But sort of put that in there. Now, if you're looking at your painting, you're thinking, there really should be a shadow somewhere else. Like And say right here, and see that that shadow goes down a little bit deeper. Really, this flower's closer to the back, and so that means that it's going to be a little bit more shaded around the edge here. Not everything is necessarily the same distance to us, and that creates differences in the shadow as well. So back here, that would be, especially near the backs of the flowers, which would be, or the backs of the leaves rather, which would be closer to the wall. Going to go back to using my detail brush now. And I think I want a brown that's sort of an in-between shade to do the vines here that are holding everything together. I can make that lighter or darker later. Right now, I just want to see them as I lay them out. So you know what I'm missing are these walls, or this edge of the slat. That's what I forgot to complete, so let's do that now. Still going with a somewhat darker brown color. Eventually I'll use a full dark brown color on that, but right now I just want to see how things lie. And try to connect things properly in the middle. The shadow can go, or the slat can go through the shadows, but you don't want to put it so much through the leaves. So everything's correctable here. But if you can avoid it, so much the better. All right, now we have what I need, which is the place to sort of be able to draw these vines to. And I'm going to fill in the bottom of this flower. It's barely opening. Put another vine down there like that. If I think I've got sort of vines penciled in for everything. I'm going to go back to the same color I used for the shade and draw in shade vines too. So if you're someone who does a lot of sketching, you're probably going to find that you're doing okay on this. If you're like me and your sketching's kind of rusty, you're going to be like, what do I do here? What do I draw here? That's okay too. Sometimes I have a difficult time making choices about where I should put things. All right. Let's move on to the leaves. For most of the leaves, I'm going to get some more. We want a fairly pale color. That's too dark. Add more white. Even a bit paler than that, I think. Because the leaves, of course, they do have some tone to them. They're not pure white. Right here. And as I go along painting the pale parts of the leaves, you'll notice I'm also sort of deciding where the shadows are going to need to go. So for example, the back of this leaf is going to be a shadow. And this half here of this leaf that I'm leaving blank is going to be a shadow. A little bit more water. The back half of this leaf here is going to be a shadow, or I guess the top half, since that's what is the vertical surface. We just have the illusion of depth. The top halves of the buds are all going to be paler green. Nope, wrong side. It's okay. I can go and correct that later. Okay, so now clean my brush and mix up a darker color to do the shadow of the leaves in. There we go. The shadows can be right here. This is also going to be in shadow. Okay. We have to do the flowers as well. You start with a light color. Just do a dot in the middle where the yellow center will be. And then starting from, and again, I'm using a fairly pale color. This is the one that I used for the leaves. Start going in. And we're going to get the colors later when we go over this in a colored glaze. So don't worry too much about those just yet. This is also the buds of morning glories are this really weird shade of green, gray, white. It's kind of interesting. All right. So now we're going to take a break a bit from that, give it some time to dry, and we're going to do some glazing on the background here. So we're going to do a white glaze, and occasionally I'm just going to throw in a fleck of brown. The slight variations of color just keep it that much more interesting. We may come back and do little streaks of other colors as well. Faint, but still adding just a little bit of variation to the painting that makes it more interesting to the eye. There you go. I'm not too concerned with the tight details here. Need a bit more white. Oh, there we go. And getting to the point where I need to switch brushes to something a little bit more detailed. All right. I think it's time to start adding a bit of color. I want the shadows to be not brown, but a little bit more cool. So going to go over them with a mixture of white and just a little bit of blue to make them appear cooler. I'm going to water this down pretty good. The point of glazing is to let the underpainting you've made sort of do a lot of the work for you in terms of shading and things like that. So trying to avoid those stems and those leaves, just touching on the shadow and ever so subtly changing it. Again, if you don't go over anything, glazing is forgiving. You'll just mix up whatever color you think it needs to be and then go over it again. Apparently they've managed to locate the fingerprints of several famous painters from paintings where they touched the canvas and made little tiny touch-ups with their fingers. Pretty sure Da Vinci is one of them. And remembering which of these are shadows and which of these are actual green stems. This is still shadow. And yes, I've been distracted. I'm variating the color of the background. Get back to it, Christine. This one's shadow. This one's shadow. This is a lot of shadow. That one was shadow. And this one was shadow. Now you might have noticed that despite your best efforts, the glaze doesn't apply evenly all the time. And so you get this sort of almost shimmering effect. That can be very attractive. This is a shadow. There we are. And further down on this side, this is a shadow. I think that's a shadow as well. Start tapping the bottom here. Okay. That's sufficient for now. And because I've still got some leftover color here, I'm going to take my white and blue mixture and just soften the edges of this flower here. There we go. Soften that sharp contrast area. It's a very gentle gradient from the outside to the inside, and that can be hard to capture. And you know, there's no gradient there. Okay. And before I forget, I'm going to take this glaze and just poke over a few spots in the background to again add that little bit of visual variation to the painting. There we are. So I like to work in contrasting pairs. Now that we've lightened things, I'd like to go darken some things. So I can take the burnt umber full strength and just go straight down this line. So that's supposed to be pure dark there. And just try to skip over some of the vines if they cross. Oh. I'm gonna lighten that burnt umber again. And go over the edges of the flower, making it, again, setting off that gradient, trying to work at that slowly. Letting it dry between applications. A wet brush around the edges helps kind of get that soft transition going. Mixing that in. Okay. Make sure everything's clean. And it's time to start on our green color. So I have a Viridian green, which I'm going to mix with a little bit of cadmium yellow to make it more of the leaf green that you can see in the light over there. So taking the yellow, just adding bits of green at a time until we've got something very alive. There we go. Actually, I think I need a little bit of the white to just cut back a little bit of the intensity. There we go. And now I paint it over the leaves, the buds, and any stems that might be in the sunlight as well. So you can go right over the sun and the shade part. I may need a finer brush for that. Now you can see I didn't have too much concern about doing the intense color because it's already been cut down a bit. Already been cut down a bit by the shadowing on my palette, and I'll do something to emphasize that, or shadowing on my canvas rather. I'll do something to emphasize the differences between light and shadow a little later too, just so that they pop out pretty good. But But for now, we can paint it all green. Got stems. Mix up just a little bit more. Slightly different shade, but that's okay. Just a little bit more variation in the painting. Can even just enhance that variation by doing it in some more random places. Little bit. Actually, I'll wait for that. All off the line. It doesn't show up too much. If I do another round of white, I'll just fix that then. Okay. First go over of the leaves. Oh, almost missed. And the buds. Leaves and the buds. Okay. I'm going to mix a very pale version of the glaze. So a very light green. And then gently apply that over here. There we go. And now I'm going to take my detail brush and I'm going to do two things. I have a little bit of yellow on my palette that's not being used. I'm going to mix up a tiny bit of that yellow and stick it on this dot here in the middle. Maybe go a little bit outside of that too. That will probably need a couple more layers. And then cleaning my brush, going back to the cobalt blue. And mixing that up. And doing a brush of that. Over top of where I want the blue to be. And again, I'm going to have to come back and probably do a few more layers of different intensities, but we have to start somewhere. So glazing has a very long and rich history. This is the techniques that were used by the Renaissance painters, Da Vinci, Rembrandt, and same going back to the monks, cloister paintings. At the time, color, there was no store that sold paint. Any paint you had to make by yourself. Or you had an apprentice make it for you as part of their apprenticeship. And that meant, and acquiring raw materials for those could be quite expensive. Ultramarine blue used to be made out of crushed lapis lazuli, which was mostly came from Afghanistan and was probably more precious than gold. And that's why the Virgin Mary is always painted blue in paintings, because they use their most paint in glazes, of course. Very, very thin glazes. But they did that for painting Mary. Okay, I think I'm about ready to do some more greeny shadows. You notice we're bouncing around like this to allow layers of paint to dry in between. So that I'm not going over an area that's still wet. This I might need a little bit more shadow on. That's about right. So I'm mixing up a darker green that I'm going to use for the shadows here. Oop, looks like I missed. Missed some of the vines earlier. I'll have to go back and correct that. Glaze over this part right now. And just do, this part could actually be dark. This part. That I've actually made too wet. Mix up a little bit more. There. Go back to our blue on the flowers. Gonna add more blue to my palette, actually. And maybe mix in just a bit of white. There we go. There we go. So again, going around the deep parts of the flowers. And then I can also add just a few highlights. So I'm mixing up a little bit of yellow and white together. Add a touch of green. There we go. A few highlights on the leaf here, so. I think in my previous paintings I did the veining on the leaves in dark colors, and I think they're actually much more subtle than that. So I'm going to do some veining on the leaves. in a pale light green. Yeah. I might have to mix up a different color for the shadow there. Touch more highlight on the buds. Okay. All right. Just one more glaze of white around the edge here. Pale blue. Use a wet brush to see if I can't get that gradient back. Ooh. Oh. That will probably need some work. Yeah. That's a little bit better. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there. But you can see how you can continue on building up layers until you've got vibrant colors up here. And the leaves maybe have a little bit more vibrancy as well. You could add in more detail. You could add in deeper shadow. Really, it's hard to say when these paintings are done. All right. So you decide when you're finished. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me. And we'll see you in the fall, I think. I've got some fall paint-alongs planned as well. So take care, and we'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.